Hi, I'm David Judson, Editor-in-Chief at Stratfor. With me today is Reva Bhalla, our Vice President of Analysis. Thank you for joining me, Reva. Appreciate your time. It's the point on the calendar that we do our review of our annual forecast. This will be our third quarter review. Europe, the ongoing dissolution of the European Union, we've been talking about for a long time, but things coming to a head around Greece, U.S.-Russia relations, China, the U.S. refining its Mideast strategy, President Obama's point man against the Islamic State in Turkey today. Meanwhile, all of this against the backdrop of the Iran nuclear negotiations literally coming down to the wire. Where to start, Rhea?
I think Europe is a good place to start.
Okay,
That's the big one, right? Yeah. So this is the quarter where Europe gets hit with its reality check. And things are not looking good for Germany in particular. Everyone's looking at Greece as the victim, but really Germany is on the defensive. It's going to appear tough, but look at the situation it's in. You have a camp of creditors that's now very divided, many members who don't actually want to see a Grexit take place and are pressuring Germany to strike a deal. Others saying to Germany that you need to maintain a hard line, along with the German populace that thinks Schäuble is actually a very popular figure in German politics right now. Finance minister, yes, for maintaining a very strict line on the Greek negotiations. And so Germany doesn't have a whole lot of room to budge in making big concessions to the Greeks when it comes to things like debt relief. On the other hand, the Greeks coming off of this referendum, which was something that we had forecast last quarter, that they would resort to a referendum given the political pressures on them. How are they going to make any big concessions to the creditors after they've been emboldened by a referendum like that? And so without much room for either side to budge, a negotiation is going to be very critical, and time is critical.
Can Syriza survive, the ruling party?
I think either way, we're going to see a government collapse by Syriza, either by a banking crisis or by caving and signing a deal that's going to cause rebellion within the ranks of Syriza. Remember, the Greek banks at this point have about roughly 5 days to operate under current circumstances, and then things are going to get very, very rough. So we're going to be watching for that shift in sentiment towards Syriza. And the Germans are going to gamble on regime change in Greece. Either way, we could see last-minute compromises, but any deal that comes out of that is going to be disingenuous. The Greeks can't implement the reforms. The Germans aren't going to release the funds without seeing the reforms. And so we think that the path to Grexit is paved. It's not going to be an imminent thing. It's going to be slow. It's going to be messy. There's going to be a limbo situation, but that's what we're moving into.
Moving on to U.S.-Russia, that rift is widening. At the same time, China and Russia seem to be moving closer, and they've got the BRICS conference going on right now as we speak in Moscow. How do you see this dynamic playing out across Washington, Moscow, Beijing?
So that underlying distrust between the United States and Russia still very much there. It's enduring, and we're going to see that standoff between the U.S. and Russia become a lot more visible this quarter. So tons of military exercises planned on both sides with NATO, and on the Russian side, there's going to be, nuclear rhetoric, all kinds of posturing in the conventional military sense, adding to tensions. Nothing in terms of a major military push by the Russians. We still see the constraints there. But they already know they're not going to have financial sanction eased within this quarter. The options are pretty open. So overall, it's just going to be a tense atmosphere, not much dramatic change overall in that dynamic.
Middle East, still a really complicated piece of real estate, growing more so, it seems, by the day. Now we have, as I said earlier, Obama's Islamic State point man in Turkey. There seems to be a lot of activity happening on the border, escalation of not only tensions, but mobilization of troops. Are the Turks going to cross into Syria? Is what I'm talking
into Syria, right. So, the idea of Turkey deepening its influence in the Middle East is something that obviously we've been talking about for some time. Now, whether Turkey actually takes the concrete step of militarily intervening in one of its Arab neighbors, that is really the question for the quarter. We think overall that the potential for a Turkish military intervention has increased. And we see that Turkey is establishing options for itself militarily on the border and creating a defensive line against IS and trying to seal the border. There's also potential for a bargain with the United States over use of Turkish bases. But the United States is still trying to see through a negotiation with Iran. Backing a Turkish play in Syria would obviously complicate that. So I think that's going to be a major constraint on Turkish moves. In the domestic political sphere in Turkey, military intervention is not a popular thing.
No.
And so the AKP still has to get through coalition talks, which are likely to fail, and we're likely to see early elections. That's going to be another constraint on Turkish action. So I think this is really going to be a quarter of Turkey preparing its options more than anything. But the idea of Turkey deepening its military influence in the Middle East overall, that's happening.
That's happening. And just lastly, because we're running short on time here, Iran, do you think we're going to have a deal?
Well, we are already extending the deadline for a deal. So many self-imposed deadlines. And so will we eventually see a deal? Yes. We can never, predict, is it going to hit this deadline or that deadline? But already we've passed, or we are going to pass the period where the 30-day congressional review would take place. And now that turns into a 60-day congressional review. So that means implementation of a deal and therefore sanctions relief. We're looking at the fall at the earliest for this to unroll. So another, major burden on the United States to ensure that it can see through that negotiation while trying to balance, a potentially renegade Turkish policy on the one side and at the same time reassure its Arab allies in this fight in Syria and Iraq at a time that, the Arabs are not comfortable with the Turks, former Ottomans treading on Arab soil and are very distrustful of U.S. intentions toward Iran.
I'm going to have to wrap up here, Reva, but thank you very much. Going to be a busy quarter and a busy year. But we will have everything, the subjects that we've talked about here and a lot more at our website. We'll be publishing Wednesday, July 8th. This is our third quarter forecast. And thank you very much. Thank you, Reva.
Thank you.